Bill Richardson, a former governor and UN ambassador who worked to Washington, AP. Bill Richardson, a two-term Democratic governor of New Mexico and a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations who dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died. He was 75. The Richardson Center for Global Engagement, which he founded and led, said in a statement Saturday that he died in his sleep at his home in Chatham, Massachusetts. He lived his entire life in the service of others, including both his time in government and his subsequent career, helping to free people held hostage or wrongfully detained abroad, said Mickey Bergman, the center's vice president. There was no person that Governor Richardson would not speak with if it held the promise of returning a person to freedom. The world has lost a champion for those held unjustly abroad, and I have lost a mentor and a dear friend. Time equals 400 Ms. greater than before his election in 2002 as governor. Richardson was UN ambassador and energy secretary under President Bill Clinton and served 14 years as a congressman representing northern New Mexico. Richardson also traveled the globe as an unofficial diplomatic troubleshooter, negotiating the release of hostages and American servicemen from North Korea, Iraq, Cuba and Sudan. He bargained with a who's who of America's adversaries, including Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. It was a role that Richardson relished, once describing himself as the informal undersecretary for thugs, armed with a golden resume and wealth of experience in foreign and domestic affairs. Richardson ran for the 2008 Democratic nomination for president in hopes of becoming the nation's first Hispanic president. He dropped out of the race after fourth-place finishes in the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary. Former U.S. diplomat Bill Richardson speaks to reporters during a news conference in New York, Tuesday, November 16, 2021. Richardson, a two-term Democratic governor of New Mexico who later was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died, Saturday, September 2, 2023. AP photo, Seth Vinik. File. Richardson was the nation's only Hispanic governor during his two terms. He described being governor as the best job I ever had. It's the most fun. You can get the most done. You set the agenda, Richardson said. As governor, Richardson signed legislation in 2009 that repealed the death penalty. He called it the most difficult decision in my political life, because he previously had supported capital punishment. Other accomplishments as governor included $50,000 a year minimum salaries for the most qualified teachers in New Mexico, an increase in the state minimum wage from $5.15 to $7.50 an hour, pre-kindergarten programs for 4-year-olds, renewable energy requirements for utilities and financing for large infrastructure projects, including a commercial spaceport in southern New Mexico and a $400 million commuter rail system. Richardson continued his freelance diplomacy even while serving as governor. He had barely started his first term as governor when he met with two North Korean envoys in Santa Fe. He traveled to North Korea in 2007 to recover remains of American servicemen killed in the Korean War. In 2006, he persuaded Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir to free Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist Paul Salopek. Richardson transformed the political landscape in New Mexico. He raised and spent record amounts on his campaigns. He brought Washington-style politics to an easygoing western state with a part-time legislature. Lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, complained that Richardson threatened retribution against those who opposed him. Democratic State Senator Tim Jennings of Roswell once said Richardson was beating people over the head in his dealings with lobbyists on a healthcare issue. Richardson dismissed criticisms of his administrative style. Admittedly, I am aggressive. I use the bully pulpit of the governorship, Richardson said. But I don't threaten retribution. They say I am a vindictive person. I just don't believe that. Time equals 400 Ms. greater than longtime friends and supporters attributed Richardson's success partly to his relentlessness. Bob Gallagher, who headed the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, said if Richardson wanted something done then, expect him to have a shotgun at the end of the hallway. Or a ramrod. After dropping out of the 2008 presidential race, Richardson endorsed Barack Obama over Hillary Clinton. That happened despite a long-standing friendship with the Clintons. Obama later nominated Richardson as Secretary of Commerce, but Richardson withdrew in early 2009 because of a federal investigation into an alleged pay-to-play scheme involving his administration in New Mexico. Time equals 400 ms. Greater than months later, the federal investigation ended with no charges against Richardson and his former top aides. Richardson had a troubled tenure as Energy Secretary because of a scandal over missing computer equipment with nuclear weapons secrets at Los Alamos National Laboratory and the government's investigation and prosecution of former nuclear weapons scientist Wen-Ho Lee. Richardson approved Lee's firing at Los Alamos in 1999. Lee spent 9 months in solitary confinement, charged with 59 counts of mishandling sensitive information. Lee later pleaded guilty to 1 count of mishandling computer files and was released with the apology of a federal judge. Time equals 400 ms. Greater than William Blaine Richardson was born in Pasadena, California, but grew up in Mexico City with a Mexican mother and an American father who was a U.S. bank executive. He attended prep school in Massachusetts and was a star baseball player. He later went to Tufts University and its graduate school in international relations, earning a master's degree in international affairs. Richardson moved to New Mexico in 1978 after working as a Capitol Hill staffer. He wanted to run for political office and said New Mexico, with its Hispanic roots, seemed like a good place. He campaigned for Congress just 2 years later, his only losing race. In 1982, he won a new congressional seat from northern New Mexico that the state picked up in reapportionment. He resigned from Congress in 1997 to join the Clinton administration as UN ambassador and became Secretary of Energy in 1998, holding the post until the end of the Clinton presidency. Time equals 400 ms. Greater than former Associated Press writer Barry Massey contributed significant biographical material to this obituary. File. Bill Richardson, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, addresses the press in Geneva, Switzerland on Thursday, March 26, 1998. Richardson, a 2-term Democratic governor of New Mexico who later was the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died, Saturday, September 2, 2023. AP photo. Donald Stampfli. File. Democratic presidential hopefuls gather on the stage prior to the first Democratic presidential primary debate of the 2008 election hosted by the South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, SC. Thursday, April 26, 2007. From left. Mike Gravel, former U.S. Senator from Alaska, Senator Barack Obama, D. Ill. Senator Christopher Dodd, D. Court, former Senator John Edwards of South Carolina, Representative Dennis Kucinich, D. Ohio, Senator Joe Biden, D. Del. New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, and Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, D.N.Y. Richardson, a 2-term Democratic governor of New Mexico who later was the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died, Saturday, September 2, 2023. AP photo. J. Scott Applewhite. File. North Korean Colonel Park In-ho, right, shakes hands with Anthony Principe, former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, as Governor Bill Richardson of New Mexico looks on in Pyongyang, North Korea, Monday, April 9, 2007, prior to a visit aboard the USS Pueblo. Richardson, a 2-term Democratic governor of New Mexico who later was the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died, Saturday, September 2, 2023. AP photo. Foster Klug. File. President-elect Barack Obama and Commerce Secretary-designate New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson laugh after a question was asked about Richardson's beard. Wednesday, December 3, 2008, during a news conference in Chicago. Richardson, a two-term Democratic governor of New Mexico who later was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died, Saturday, September 2, 2023. AP photo. Charles Darapak. File. Former U.S. diplomat Bill Richardson speaks to reporters after a news conference in New York, Tuesday, November 16, 2021. Richardson, a two-term Democratic governor of New Mexico who later was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and dedicated his post-political career to working to free Americans detained overseas, has died, Saturday, September 2, 2023. AP photo. Seth Beanick. File.